Davenport Institute for Public Engagement and Civic Leadership. We work with local governments across the United States as a trainer, a convener, and a thought leader with a goal of building stronger communities and greater confidence in local democracy through authentic public engagement. I am truly humbled and honored to be here in the presence of these incredible women and be able to moderate this important discussion. I sincerely believe that women's issues are societal issues. And to quote Michelle Obama, a favorite female leader of mine, no country can ever truly flourish if it stifles the potential of its women and deprives itself of the contribution of half of its citizens. It is essential that we have these conversations. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our incredible panel of successful female leaders in local government, all of which are also members of our Davenport Institute Advisory Council, in addition to their other roles. I will not be reading their full bios, but we will add a link to their bios, and it just got added into the chat so that for your reference, you can read all the wonderful information about them. And so first, I'd like to introduce Deborah Feng. She is the past city manager of the city of Cupertino in California. Caitlin Robinette Jachimowicz. She is a past city council member in the city of Morgan Hill and the current elected city of Morgan Hill treasurer. In addition to several other important roles she plays, she can share that. Lydia Romero, the city manager of Lemon Grove, California, and Megan Scheid, the deputy city manager for the city of Roseville. Okay, wonderful. So we'll begin now, and I'm going to open this question up to all of you, and maybe Deborah, we can start with you.
Sure.
What are some of the challenges that you have faced as a woman in your career, specifically related to local government? I know several of you have other backgrounds, and feel free to bring them in, but particularly in relation to local government, what have those challenges been as a woman?
I would say that with regards to city management in Cupertino, I think that folks just need to get used to, and I mean both staff and elected, getting used to a leadership style that is kind of born in being a woman, right? We lead differently. We communicate differently. We value different things in staff. And I will just talk a little bit about some of the internal stuff. When I came into Cupertino, one of my things is not change for change's sake, but change management, and wanting to get the internal culture to be where I think it's a fun place to work, where we have open dialogue about things, and where everybody knows, yes, I'm the city manager, but I don't necessarily have all the answers or solutions to problems or challenges we might face as a staff. So what I did is I just used my leadership skills and helped people see that it's okay to offer dissenting opinions, for example, so to make sure we don't go, quote, down the road to Abilene, to make sure that both staff and council were up to date with things, but also made sure that they could see what I was up to, right? Make everything transparent and visible. Communication with public and others was not that strong when I went in there. So basically what I did is try to increase the transparency and decision-making kind of throughout staff all the way out to the public. That was the biggest challenge when I got there.
Thank you so much. Caitlin, what about you? Maybe particularly in relation to your role as a city council member.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest challenges I had to overcome, sort of the expectation of what a young blonde woman, what her contributions would be on council, what my level of expertise may be because of the way that I looked, and the level of engagement that I would be able to participate in as a young mother. So I think that I had to challenge all of these different expectations of who people expected me to be before I could get them to listen to the content of what I was saying. I had, Maureen knows this, but I had comments during council meetings. People come up to me at break and tell me that I was a brave little girl for sitting up on council with all of those, you know, seemingly smart men, I suppose, was what the comment was referring to. I've had comments about my clothes, my hair, my shoes. And I think that for me, the challenge was getting people to understand that my most valuable contribution was in the work I was able to do, the ideas that I had, my collaborative nature, and getting them to focus on me as being a valuable member of the council first, and sort of my personal background second.
Yes. Yes, I'm sure many women in our panel and also our participants have had some of those same experiences. I know I have too, particularly earlier in my career when I was younger. Megan, how about the challenges that you faced in your career journey?
Definitely echo what Deb and Caitlin had to say. I won't repeat those, but just wanted to give a thumbs up to that too, because I have experienced that as well. And I also think along with some of that goes an underestimation of the value that we bring with the whether it's appearance, level of friendliness, you know, not being on, especially in the city government, you know, if you're not, you know, building something, or you're not public safety, or you know, or fixing something, that there's a lot of other skills that contribute to the team. And so when I was in the Navy, they talked about it being tip of the spear. You know, if you're fighter pilot, if you're a surface warfare officer, if you're a submarine officer, you're the tip of the spear. Everybody else was kind of just background noise. It took a long time for me to learn that, you know, the team requires all of its players. So even if you're one of the people who maybe, I'll use a basketball analogy because my son didn't get any play time in his middle school basketball team, but he helped the good players get better because he was at all the practices scrimmaging with them. I'm not saying that that's our role here. But what I'm saying is that I think in city government, there tends to be over the 16 years I've been here, less of an appreciation for HR, for the role of IT, for the role of communications, for the role of culture, like Deb was talking about too, that now are really being elevated as, you know, being employers of choice. What does that take? You know, we now have men taking parental leave as well as women. So I think some of those challenges that we've seen in the past have really had significant changes over the last couple of years. But I think being kind of underestimated and maybe undervalued have been two of the biggest challenges. And then also with the parental role in long track. That hasn't happened to me at Roseville, luckily, but I think that has maybe from 20 years ago been more of a concern.
Okay, thanks so much, Megan. And Lydia in Lemon Grove. And I know you had some challenging situations, female or not.
Exactly. And I think that will run the gender gamut. But when I will say that one of the challenges, I was the first woman to sit in this position for the city of Lemon Grove, and although the city is a relatively young city and the city complement, we're about 40 years old. I was the first woman to hold this seat, and I was the first Latina to hold this seat. So there were high expectations, but I quickly found out that several of the older male council members didn't trust my advice or my opinion, And they always went back to the former city manager who was in another local community to double check, are she saying it right? Is she giving us the right advice? Is she going in the right direction? And luckily, I had a really great relationship with my predecessor in which he would call me and share with me, hey, I spoke with your council member. So that was one of the challenges that I had to overcome in the first year or so, is to get the confidence of our city council so they don't double check the advice that I gave them. I will zoom back to the early part of my career. So I started this career in 1990, and there were not a lot of women city managers in the complement of California cities. I think at the time there were less than 50 city managers, and there were over 450 cities. So not a lot. We've made better advances now that we fast forward to 2023, but I can remember sitting in meetings, and again, the same thing, advice or opinions from a woman or a youngish looking woman was overlooked. We've come a long way. I still see it happen today. And that's why I think it's really important that if there are other women in the room to help echo that opinion. Exactly. I can tell you that in the city manager world, my colleagues are really good about respecting the advice, and I would have to say in San Diego, we don't necessarily look at gender as who the city manager is, because we're there to help each other out, and we have each other's back. So it's really nice.
Yeah, so important to have, I think, that network of support, whether it be other female leaders or male and female, and also within our organization that other women are supporting other women. That's not always the case. Sometimes I know I've definitely been in work situations myself where other women were not necessarily being supportive of women who were trying to move forward and do the right thing, or perhaps advance and get ahead. So I'm seeing the head nods. I think we've all experienced that. And that's such a shame. I know maybe perhaps we'll go off track just a little bit and you could share. I know for me personally, I always have felt that one of my roles and goals is to help support other women. What about all of you?
I have a specific thing I want to say about that, because I have this working theory. There's no way for me to test it out. But this generation of women that we have on screen, and then I'll tell you where my experience comes from, is probably the first generation or later that experienced Title IX, which is when they started funding girls' team sports.
Yep.
Schools,
Yep.
right? So I found, now this is not local government, I was at the federal level. I found that I found support amongst my peers, but the generation of women who was about 10 or 15 years ahead of me, I can imagine they went through a very competitive environment to get where they were going. And I didn't ever get support from them, like opening the door and having coaching or talking and helping me with my career or giving me advice. So I had to go elsewhere. And fortunately, I found lots of folks that I could talk to about that. And it just makes it more of a stronger feeling for me that women our age-ish and younger, I do exactly what you do, Maureen. It is part of my charge to help women get into the positions they're looking for the right reasons, right? We have goals and aspirations and ambition, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Unabashedly and unapologetically me. That's what I try to do with most of I do mentor men and women, but I think it's important to kind of acknowledge that.
Yes. Megan.
Yeah, thanks, Maureen. I think, our city has been in a unique position of having about a dozen consecutive years of female mayors. And we even had at one point when the council had one male on it. So that's been at the elected level. At the staff level, we haven't had as many women in the executive leadership level. And sometimes my theory, kind of like Deb has one, is that when that's happened, and luckily it's been rare, it's been because I think women have grown up in an organization that really has only allowed a few women, let's say, to advance to those levels. And so I think sometimes other women think like, that is my competition for that spot. You know, there's going to be one of them, and I'm working against you and you for it. So instead of supporting each other and kind of opening up the opportunities for more people to be at that level, it's taking each other down. And I think that is something that we're working through generationally, probably, because it's been an experience from decades ago and kind of a holdover. On International Women's Day, the song I played in the morning as I was getting ready for work was 9 to 5. I thought, Dolly Parton kind of had that fight song, and I think we're past that now. I think we're getting there. But I think in local government we've had a little more way to go. In the private sector and in the military have found a little more opportunity too.
Okay, Lydia, did you have something you wanted to share on that?
Yes, my experience is a little bit different than Deborah's. When I started searching out female city managers early in my career, I found one. She was a city manager of a local community. Her husband was a city manager of a bigger community. And to this day, Denise Overham, who is the person that I met and encouraged me to continue throughout my career and continue to say, reach your goal to be a city manager. We are still, she's still my mentor to this day. She has since retired, but it was her strong personality and her encouragement that kept me going when people said, women aren't city managers, women are not cut out to be city managers. So now that I'm in this role, I feel it is my duty to encourage young women to seek out director positions and assistant city manager positions and even city manager positions. And I had a young analyst that started here, and she had left us for a higher position, and I'm still in touch with her. And I sent her a position for an assistant city manager, and we had a long conversation about her not feeling ready for it, her not having the experience. And I told her, you won't know until you try. And she actually was one of the top 2 candidates for the position because she tried. And I think that's one of the big takeaway is just try. Yep. Try for it because you don't know, you may end up getting it.
Yeah. And we're going to go into that a little bit deeper shortly. Caitlin, what did you want to share on this issue?
I just wanted to say yes to everything that I'm hearing. As a woman who's been an elected, I've also been trained with other women who are interested in running for office. And this is just a thing that we hear time and time again from other women that there's this interesting dichotomy that some of my greatest champions of my life have been women who have come before me and have been my mentors. And so I feel like that's really important to say that for me, Ann Ravel, who was county council in Santa Clara when I was in law school, who went on to be the chair of the FPPC and the FEC, still takes my text messages and my emails and my phone calls and is one of my biggest champions. But the woman who told me that I was a brave little girl, a former female council member from my same city, chastising me to break and telling me that I needed to learn how to keep my opinions to myself during meetings when being a council member is just quite simply giving your opinion on matters. I think that I have been most hurt by women. And I think it's important to say that women that I looked up to, women that I wanted to look as a role model have really hurt me in times as I've progressed in my career. And I've always considered it as those women have been through something, and they either see themselves as needing to make sure that what they've experienced, I will not experience, or just as was said, that there's one seat at the table and it's full for them. And so I think it's really important for all of us to be very intentional and make the decision of what kind of woman we want to be, just as Lydia said, and make sure that all the people that come after us don't experience that, and that we're intentional and not hurtful to the people that come up behind us.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice if all of us as women leaders could really commit to supporting other women in whatever roles they are in and in whatever roles they are aspiring to be in.
Mhm.
And it sounds like in this group, we've got a lot of commitment for that. But I would just encourage others to really, really consider that. Let's jump into the question of, how have you balanced these full-time careers, in some cases families, or potentially caring for elderly parents, maybe doing children and parents at both, maybe doing single parenthood or just single womanhood? I mean, all of the above. How do you balance it? Let's start with you, Megan.
Thanks, Maureen. I had at a point I got divorced. I was the communications director at Sac County, and I had talked about my children so little that people were surprised to know I had children.
Wow.
So that goes back to my mommy track comment earlier on, because I've talked to some of our employees here, and they hadn't heard of this, and this mommy track idea. And it's when companies, organizations hire women of childbearing age, they weren't quite sure if they wanted to hire them or invest in them and their career growth, because they would just be leaving the workforce at some point to stay home with kids. So it'd be wasted money. And so I have always been serious about my career. I've never not worked. So I just felt like, okay, then don't talk about your kids. So that was kind of interesting. When I came to the city of Roseville 2 years later, I didn't make it a big deal. I had so I was a single parent at that point. I was a single parent all through both kids for 15 years while raising the kids. And like logistically, how did I make it work? I spent a lot of money. I had a daycare provider come before, nanny come before school at 5:30 so I could go to the gym before work. And I had at night so I could go to city council meetings. When we had crises, I had neighbors on call. I don't have any family nearby. And I share this just because I know other people just wonder how can I do it? And I guess I want to say you can do it. You do. It does take. It's not without some complication and some sacrifice, but it can be done. I think my kids are. I lived close to work too, intentionally. When I got this job, I moved 10 minutes from the office, and that was a big difference. So in terms of balancing that, and then my kids always had an understanding of the urgent nature of the work, especially with issues and emergencies, crises, what is weather, and, we all know the different things that can happen in a city. So I think that they learned something in there too. It's not all bad for kids. To see their mother do hard things and to see her be depended on. But I think that the self-care aspect and relying on your village
Yes.
is really important, because I had really, really wonderful parents at the school and in the neighborhood who were other women supporting me, and men who were willing to, take my kids at night at the last minute or I had somebody come in the middle of the night one time when we had a 6 a.m. news conference, that kind of stuff. So I would say don't be afraid to reach out, because there are people that are willing to support you.
Yeah. Yeah. Lydia, what do you have to share on this? Did you say your daughter's on here?
I do.
Yes, I thought I saw her. Shout out to, is it Kate McPherson?
Yeah.
Nice.
You have an awesome mom, and that's so exciting to see
honest.
her on the call.
Nice. So I'm probably the worst example of life balance, because I grew up in the profession knowing that I had to be better than everybody else and better than my counterparts. And for me to give 100% of my job, I had to give 100% to work. And so I did not do a very good job of work-life balance. As I've gotten older, I've realized that it's very important, especially as my sister and I care for our aged parents. They live in the house that I grew up in, and they're still pretty self-sufficient, but we make sure that there's always someone there to assist them. My dad will be 93 this year. My mom will be 83 this year. So they're very they're up there in age, but we still have to make sure that they get to their doctor's appointments, they have groceries, we cook their meals, so they have something to eat for the rest of the day. And so that's a full-time job, but it takes us all weekend long. As the leader in my organization, I impress upon my younger staff that they don't need to make the same mistake I did, and that family is incredibly important. And so, for example, we created what they call a baby on board policy for this city. So I've got a lot of young folks that are here, both male and female, that have young children. They can bring their children to work. There is an ability for them to bring their young baby to work, especially if they have an office to close it. And we have that policy. The council is 100% supportive of that policy to ensure that we accommodate our young families in this work organization. Because as I tell people, don't do what I did, be better than me, which is make sure you do have a rich life outside of work. And now that I'm in my late 50s, I'm trying to recreate that balance with some better self-awareness.
Thank you. Such an important message, Lydia. Yeah. Caitlin.
When I got on council, my daughter was 2, and I was also a full-time attorney. Within a year, I was pregnant, and then my son was born when I was on council. And so I was nursing. I had an infant, I had a toddler, and I had a full-time job as an attorney. I was recently at the Municipal Law Institute conference and was having a conversation with another elected from Redwood City. And she was kind of casually talking about the day she doesn't see her kids. And I realized we sort of all that have these late night council meetings have a day we don't see our kids. Mine was Wednesdays. I didn't see my daughter on Wednesdays. And so sometimes I wouldn't see her from Tuesday at bedtime until Thursday at bedtime. And it made me feel like a terrible mom, frankly. And I knew that part of what I was doing for her. I was trying to be a role model for her. And so I think that the best way for us to bring balance is to, number one, have more women in charge, like Lydia, who come up with these policies, to see more of us in those roles, and to be having more conversations about the fact that there are many women or men that are not seeing their children for like at long stretches of time, when we have these ridiculous late night council meetings that might go until 1 a.m. Is this the most appropriate thing? And is it the most appropriate thing to be asking the public to be giving their comments and to be participating in their government during these timeframes when they maybe are giving up the time to see their children for a full day in order to do so? Yeah. So I think that the balance is difficult, and I think none of us feel like we've done it particularly well. And so I think that I would like the conversation going forward to start shifting to not how do you achieve balance, but how can we change our systems to create that balance better for us? And I think that the best way for us to do that is to put more women in charge.
There you
Right
go. Deb,
Hey,
you
I
kind of
echo
wrap this
everything.
up for us on the balance
Yes.
and family and careers. And
You saw me nodding vehemently as we were talking. I would say that I'm probably somebody that didn't do it all that well, but when I got into city government, which wasn't all that long ago, but in my career, it's kind of towards the tail end. My kids were older, so I didn't have the conflict of young ones that I had to prepare for. I'm also was divorced pretty early, so most of my career was as a single mom. And they did have a period of time, not while I was city manager, but when I was associate center director at NASA, which was also a very intense job, just kind of differently intense than a city manager job. The kids were young, and I just made sure that I was home. I didn't have the complication of a council meeting, here and again, but I did have some late nights, but I could take calls in the evening when they were either doing homework or they were in bed. And then the other thing I can think of is I always had a workplace that was very supportive of families. So right on center at NASA Ames, which is at the south end of the San Francisco Bay Area, we had an on-site childcare center that handled kids as young as 6 months to 5 years. And so I applaud what Caitlin said about creating work environments that are more supportive of working families, not just the parents, but working families, dads included, and to be able to better support a more balanced life, because after all, we work to live, shouldn't be living to work. And I have to say, I spent more time living to work sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think some progress has been made in relation to all of this, but there's still so much. And I guess I know at this point in my life, I'm happy to see that there have been some changes. And, I remember trying to be a nursing mom and working full time and having to basically hide that that's what was going on. And I was so thankful I had a private office. And now, I worked for the city that I previously worked for. We created a space for nursing moms to have a private spot. And, like, hurrah, that some of those things are happening, and still so much to come. One thing, and this is going a little off script from what we talked about previously, but one of the things that I think is very interesting is to see what happened during the pandemic. So in the last 3 years, and, it certainly created upheaval for many people's lives. But there was an interesting thing that started to happen again for women with children who had their full-time jobs and maybe were trying to work from home on Zoom like we're doing here, and had children that were trying to be educated at home on Zoom. And I was reading an article that suggests that this whole Great Resignation and all of that, it was more women who left the workforce, perhaps because of all the challenges with balancing, again, the working and trying to parent in this weird and strange thing that we'd never done before in the pandemic. Do any of you have a quick comment on that? And then we're going to jump into some other good things.
I would just comment that this is a symptom still that women are the primary care providers, right? Probably 75–80% still falls on us women, which, our caretaking role is important to us, and we all, I think, do it really well and want to do it well. It's also innate, in a lot of us. So we need to, I still echo the whole idea of being able to find a nice work environment and tools that help us balance a little bit better.
Yeah.
I want to say one thing that I forgot to mention before that's related, and that is I think it's important for particularly the young women that are on the call to realize that another thing happens in your families, that when you become successful in your careers, it will be because of your work ethic, it will be because of your drive, it will be because of who you are, which also not only makes you the default, I think, caregiver at home, but also within family systems. Often you are the one that will be called on when there's a family emergency, when there's a sickness, when there's an elderly parent. And I think quite often we forget to secure our own oxygen masks first, right? So we're trying so hard to be that perfect parent, the perfect employee, to hide who we are, hide what's going on with ourselves, and we are taking care of ourselves last. And so I think what happened to a lot of us during the pandemic, on top of all the other things I was doing, I also became my daughter's kindergarten teacher, because she's not old enough to use Zoom without help. You can't give her a packet of a month's worth of work and expect her to be able to find the right worksheet without somebody helping her do that. So I was working as an attorney next to her kindergarten Zoom and having to teach her kindergarten at the same time. There was no time left for myself at all. And again, this is another thing that I think I'm still struggling with, but as I get older, recognizing that I can't sustain this for very much longer until I learn how to prioritize myself on top of everybody else that I'm prioritizing. So one of the things I teach at Santa Clara Law, and one of the things I really impress upon my students is learning those coping mechanisms now when you're young, before you need them, so that you can learn how to prioritize yourself when you get older. I was thrilled to hear Megan say that she got help so that she could go exercise in the morning.
Work out.
So she could go work out, like things like that, and making that a habit and a priority, I think, are really important and things that we don't talk about enough.
Absolutely. I see that we have a raised hand. If you don't mind, I'm going to go ahead and let Sonia jump in.
Absolutely. Thank you. You know, it's interesting. And I really appreciate us all getting together to do this today. You know, as Megan talked about, and so many of the other ladies here, it's, you know, if you're a caregiver, you have to take care of yourself first. You know, I'm the primary caregiver for my husband. I ultimately left my career to stay home to take care of my husband, because all of a sudden it was an inconvenience for me to work a hybrid schedule. And one of the things that I've learned from it is, and even having lunch with a friend today who I mentor with, is that you have to know when to say when. You know, we all have these great ideas. We have all these great goals, and we have to be able to sit down and really look at what's achievable, putting ourselves in the right environments to be able to live that life, raise our children, be caregivers, have a little bit of faith in ourselves and a little bit of quiet time to ourselves. And I think that just in general, there's so much pressure. I still feel like as women, in many instances, we have to work so much harder, and it shouldn't have to be that way. But, you know, it's the nature of the beast. I've been very, very fortunate to work for some amazing women who get that. They eat it, breathe it, sleep it, they understand it, and they help nurture women such as ourselves to be better.
Thanks
There's
so
a lot
much,
to be said
Sonia.
for that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thanks, Sonia. Lydia, you were going to say something.
Well, just to key off on what Sonia said, during the pandemic, I have a lot of young families and quite a few single moms and single dads. And a few of them came and said, hey, we're having trouble with this hybrid schedule. I've got my kids here. Is there something we can do to help accommodate that? Well, we were working with this local school district, what we call Ed Camp, because we had a lot of kids that didn't have internet. We opened up our community center. So we started letting our employees' children join our Ed Camp. So their kids had care for free on our dime from 6 to 6. We had educators that came from the school district that actually helped kids get online, find the right assignments, and we had kids from kindergarten to 8th grade in our Ed Camp. And so that was our solution, again, because I had a few employees that raised their hand and said, I have this real problem. So I want to impress upon folks is say something. Talk to your employer, especially if you feel you have the ability to do that, especially if it's difficult or they're drowning or they need some help. I can tell you that I can't help you or fix a problem unless I know one exists. So and that's how we solved our problem for the pandemic for our folks that were working both hybrid or in the office as well.
Yeah. Okay.
And Maureen, I'd also like to add that I'm also sensitive to the people who work in our office who don't have kids. Either they haven't had kids yet, they're empty nesters, they don't plan to have kids. And I think sometimes they feel an extra like a duty or an expectation that they're just going to, work that much more and
Fill
so
in the gap.
yeah, fill in the gap. And I think I just started being really aware of this in the Navy when I was that person that didn't have kids. And so, okay, you stand duty on the holiday and you do this, and firefighters come across this as well. They swap out shifts and, it's different things like that. So I just think it's also important that we're sensitive to the needs of all the family situations.
Yep.
and that we're not making assumptions about what's going on in people's lives just based on their family structure, what they can't handle or what they can't handle, both, right? The mommy track, or the, oh, you don't have kids, so you're going to be here, working 15 hours a day.
Yeah, exactly. Which really all gets back to, good communications happening between all of us, leaders and their employees and their leaders, and really good emotional intelligence too, I think. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit here and talk about how about advice that you might have for women who are, applying for jobs and walk in to an interview panel that's completely men. Or maybe it's not even an interview panel, they're just interviewing with only men. Any thoughts on how to show your value, how not to feel intimidated perhaps by a panel of men, how to really show up fully in those situations? Let's start with Lydia.
Oh, I've had that situation many times. I think the advice is look back at your achievements and don't be afraid to talk about your achievements, and whether those achievements are in a team form or personal achievements of what you've done. I think with women, we tend to downplay what we've done. We tend to discount. It's really hard for us to talk about ourselves and what we've accomplished in our workspace. And I think that is important. And I think it's important for the men to hear that, especially if you're interviewing with men. And I find it more difficult to interview with men of a certain age, and I'm talking city council. Mine is primarily with city council members, and I've run across city council members that are 60 plus and have been in the city council for many, many years. And they will often challenge you at an interview process to see if you are going to be flappable. Don't. Again, I would say focus on your accomplishments and your achievements, and really have that confidence that you belong there. You belong in that seat. You belong in that interview. And at the end of the day, whether you get that job or not, that is, I think, having that interview and getting to that space is a sheer compliment. Yes. And a sheer achievement.
Yes. Deb, I'll come to you next, and maybe also adding in the stereotype of women who are aggressive, so we're not intimidated. We're just going to be very aggressive in showing who we are and why we should be at the table. Maybe you could comment a little on both sides.
Yeah, I, like many women, actually on the whole meeting, have had interviews where it's all men of varying ages. And what I would say is, in an interview, typically I would be calling it, how I am is assertive. Now, for some individuals, male or female, that may feel aggressive, but I'll tell you, if the way you present in an interview at your best somehow bothers some of the panel members that are interviewing you, then that's not the environment you want to hire into anyways. So I always encourage women, when they're interviewing for women for any job, actually, three things. But the first thing is, you're interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you, for one. The second thing is, don't not apply for a job because you've decided you're unqualified. Again, the comment about downplaying our accomplishments or downplaying our experience, no man is ever going to say, I'm not qualified for that job, so I'm not going to apply for it. You let whoever that is tell you that you're not qualified, and then give you reasons. And then thirdly, if you can help it, do some practice runs. And what I'm saying is, if there's this ideal job that you think is going to come up, apply for a different job so you get some practice in with different panels, right? Don't have your first time interviewing or first time in a long time interviewing be with the job that you really want, that particular one. So those are just three things I tell people. And I'm telling you, if you're just not yourself in the throw of an interview and you don't get selected because of that, you'll never know. But I would say then that's not the place for you.
Yeah, very good point. Megan.
Gosh, Deb really hit those are my three too. Because I agree. I have a boss who had interviewed for a job and said, if I show up as I am, and if that's not who they want, then that's not the right fit for me. And I think it's being able to walk away from that. It's also, you know, I haven't had anybody mentoring me or saying, hey, what do you want to do when, you know, here, and let's get you in the right position. I've worked my way along to that and asked for those jobs. And also I realized what Deb said about putting yourself out there even before you're ready. And, you know, because not only did that signal to the organization, but I had the experience of envisioning myself in this next role. In interviewing as if I am that. And that actually opened other doors and connections, just the experience of doing that. I knew I wasn't going to get the job. So I'm a very strong proponent of going for it, even if you don't feel you're ready or you don't think you're going to get it because of, you know, they don't like you or whatever. Okay, there's still something to be gained from trying. So I think, and the man part doesn't, I don't know if it's because I started out in the Navy, but that doesn't make a difference to me. But I would say just don't try not to let a gender affect you like that. I don't know how to say it without maybe sitting down and talking to somebody about that issue.
Yeah. Caitlin.
I mean, the first thing that I would say is I studied communication in my undergrad, and even sort of we have assumptions of the way that people should communicate based on the way that they look, you know, not their race, their gender. I'm seeing somebody is hitting on it actually in the chat as well, right? But we default to certain expectations of people based on our assumptions of them. And one of them is that we assume when men speak that they will be more assertive. And when women are more assertive, then we call them aggressive. And I think that is the problem is compounded for women of color. I think that for me, the most important lesson I've learned is that your power is in being yourself. And so it doesn't matter if you are a woman and you communicate like a woman is supposed to communicate, right? Which they say that women are storytellers and we're collaborative and we're softer in our communication. It's one of the criticisms we heard about Hillary Clinton early on, that she communicated like a man and she communicated like a lawyer, and that the consultants were all saying she needed to soften and communicate like a woman. Well, her skill is in those things, right? She is assertive. If you're not presenting, if you're trying to be somebody else, it's not going to go well in the interview. The number one indication of career success is not socioeconomic background, it's not IQ, it's emotional intelligence. And we can't truly be emotionally intelligent in a room if we're trying to be somebody else. So I think you have to try to be fully embodied, be yourself, own who you are and your skills. And from that place, react to what's going on in the room. And I think if we try too hard to be something that we're not, then number one, it's not the right fit for us. And number two, we'll lose ourselves halfway through the interview and not really be able to get it back.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if by chance we would happen to get the position, we've set ourselves up for real trouble if we weren't being authentically ourselves. So yes, we've touched on this a little bit with this question, but let me go a little deeper here. So statistically, women do not apply for jobs that they don't have all the qualifications for, that might be the stretch job that is just borne out in research. And we tend, and you've talked a little bit about this, we tend to undercut our abilities. So do you have any words of advice to share about how not to do that and to really take your seat at the table fully?
Is it okay if I start with this one?
Yes, go right ahead, Caitlin.
I've thought about this a lot. I went to law school because I was being sexually harassed in my first job out of college, which is not a thing I've ever said out loud in public. It's taken me probably 15 years before I was afraid of potential ramifications for saying that. I never really considered what it meant to think like a man or be like a man or to act any differently until I was in law school and Dee Dee Myers came and spoke. She was the first female White House press secretary. She was not paid the same amount as the men that came before her. She was not given the press secretary's office, and she wasn't given a seat at the table. She was actually told by the chief of staff at the time, who was Leon Panetta, who I used to work for, that she wasn't given the same salary because she wasn't a man who needed to support a family at home. So she went out and tried to figure out why there weren't more women at the table. And time again, she heard women say that they were waiting to be more qualified, right? That they weren't raising their hand, they weren't going into these elected positions because they needed just a little bit more experience before they were doing so. And men weren't saying the same thing. Since then, there's kind of a famous internal study at HP where they found that men would apply for a job if they had 60% of the qualifications. Women would wait until they had 100%.
100%.
Yeah. Harvard Business Journal did a deeper dive to try to figure out why that was. And for me personally, it doesn't sit right to say that I'm not confident in myself, right? And what the Harvard Journal study showed was that women are 20%, there's another study it linked into. So women are 20% less likely to apply for a job as men, all things being equal, right? All the qualifications being the same, all of the factors being the same, women are 20% less likely to apply for a job. But what this Harvard study found was that it wasn't a lack of confidence. Women are saying, I didn't fit the qualifications and I'm following the rules, right? They're not saying, I don't think I couldn't do the job well. They're saying, I'm being respectful of this position. I'm being respectful of my time and of the time of the person who's reading the applications. And they don't want me for this job. That's one thing that they're saying. And the other thing they're saying is that if I try and fail, that will be attached to me. That reputation will be attached to me if I make a mistake, if I fail, in a way that it's not attached to men as much. So again, I would say that, like, yes, we have to be confident. We have to know who we are. But if we have women in the positions that are hiring, right? Like, I don't necessarily want women to go and apply for jobs that they're not qualified for. That's not what I think should happen. I think that the people in charge should be writing job descriptions and hiring for the people that they need. And when more women are in charge and writing job descriptions, they're more likely to say, apply if you have 80% of the qualifications. These are my mandatory qualifications. These are secondary. These are qualifications that are preferred, right? And so again, instead of trying to adapt ourselves to these sort of male ideals of, like, I don't want to say I'm qualified if I'm only 60% qualified. Instead, I want the expectation to be different and not a man's expectation of what I should be doing in the workforce. And so I think a little bit we're trying to adapt ourselves to the workforce that the men have set up for us. Instead of saying, no, it's powerful to say, this is what I'm qualified for. This is who I am. And I'm not right for your job. I'm going to go find something that I am right for. So just a little bit of a different perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you, Caitlin, and thanks for the information that supports what you're sharing. We've got 5 minutes left, and I still have one more question. Did any of the rest of the panel want to comment on this? Same thing, Lydia?
Yeah, just really quickly, I think Caitlin hit it on the head. It's really important to have women in roles to help other women into the field. I will just give a very brief example. I was hiring for an entry-level clerical position, and there was minimum qualifications that were there. The HR director gave me the pile of minimum qualifications, and I just, for some reason, asked, can I see the ones that weren't qualified? And I actually went through that panel of applications and ran across an application of a woman trying to re-enter the workforce. And she had such creativity when she filled out the application. I interviewed her for the job and ultimately gave her the job, because with that creativity, even though she didn't meet the minimum qualifications, I could see she had the potential to be a great employee. And she surely was. Quickly, she was in the position and we promoted her several times while I was at that organization. So I think Caitlin's right. I think it really is looking beyond the minimum qualifications and finding that diamond in the rough. And I would have to say my style is a little different because I like to look for that, and I don't subscribe to the norms and standards. But I think when we have more women in the workforce, that will happen.
Yeah. And just quickly, I think that's an interesting comment on women re-entering the workforce, because it's so easy to disqualify them. And oftentimes they have so much to bring, and they may not meet all the minimum qualifications, maybe even related to technical skills and so forth. That doesn't mean that they don't have a lot to bring to the table and a lot of value. So we don't have time to go into a deeper conversation on that. My final question that I'd like to put out to all of you, and be succinct because now we're down to 3 minutes, but what would you like to share with the next generation of female local government leaders based on your experience and where you see all of this going in the future? And I'm going to start with Deb.
I'll just keep it simple and straightforward. Do not underestimate yourself.
Powerful. Thank you, Deb. Caitlin?
I would say that you are better and smarter and more equipped to bring us into the future than anyone is giving you credit for.
Thank you, Caitlin. Lydia?
I have to go with Deb. Is you are qualified. Just try. You never know, because you could be that diamond in a rough.
Awesome. And Megan?
I would like to say, be mindful. Mine's not going to be quite as inspirational, but a little more tactical. Be mindful of taking on too many of the quiet work that needs to be done in an organization. The note taking, the birthday party planning, all of those kinds of things which take up time, but don't get recognized necessarily on performance reviews. My only little asterisk on that is if you take the minutes, then you're the one who controls the history. So that is a little hack. And I also wanted to add to be sure, and this is just kind of advice for everybody, but I think, sometimes there can be more criticisms leveled at women for a variety of reasons. Be sure that things are documented, what you say. It's not just protection, but it's just kind of promotion of the work that you're doing. And that is also a way to kind of counterbalance the quiet work that often gets put on women's shoulders, even at senior levels. That isn't necessarily fair, and women take on, more of that. If you do have that, make sure there's a way to show the value that you're adding because of that. If you're running the donation drive for something, how does that link to your culture? Talk about it on LinkedIn. Put it in your performance review, track it. So if you do have some of those more quiet work, make sure you track that and the time it's taking and the value it's adding, and then ask for other jobs and ask for other assignments too.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you here on the panel. This was just an awesome conversation. And again, it is just my sincere honor to sit at the table with all of you. I have ultimate respect. We hope that our participants have enjoyed this conversation. We encourage you to reach out to the Davenport Institute if there's any way we can support you or you're interested in any of our trainings. And the panelists, if you feel like adding an email address or a LinkedIn link, as ways that people can reach out to you directly, please do so. Notice that Pooja just put a link to the Davenport Institute website. We'd love to hear from you directly. I'm always totally open to being contacted directly as well. And just thank you all and continue to have a great month. We are still in Women's History Month, and every day each of us are making history as women. So thank you so much.